Meanwhile, President Joe Biden is stressing the importance of protecting Europe's largest nuclear power plant that is in Ukraine. During a call yesterday with the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany, Biden expressed concerns about the situation at the facility as fighting has intensified there in recent weeks. He stressed the need to, quote, avoid military operations near the plant. The leaders also recommended inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency visit the site soon in order to determine the safety of its operations. Joining us now live from southeastern Ukraine, NBC News correspondent Josh Lederman. Josh, what more can you tell us?
Well, Willie, there was more shelling near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant over the weekend. And just to give you a sense of what we're really talking about here, we're in Zaporizhzhia, which is a city of more than 700,000 people. Right across this road, that's the Dnipro River. And the nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, is right down the river on the other side in Russian-occupied territory. Right now, the winds are moving westward toward Kyiv, meaning if there were radiation release, that would potentially start moving toward population centers. And I spoke this morning with the exiled mayor of Enerhodar, the small village where the nuclear plant is located. He's now here in Zaporizhzhia, and he told me it's getting harder and harder to even figure out what's happening in and around that nuclear plant because the Russians have taken over the communication systems, the cellular systems, and the internet. People really are struggling to get information out of there. But another big concern is potential Russian retaliation for that car bombing you mentioned that killed the daughter of Alexander Dugin. There are no indications right now that Ukraine was responsible, but certainly he has been seen as the intellectual godfather, if you will, of many of Putin's views, including his staunch support for invading Ukraine. And we're already seeing some right-wingers in Russia call for some type of retaliation against Ukraine, which is already on high alert right now, because on Wednesday we are heading into Ukraine's Independence Day, which also happens to coincide with the 6-month anniversary of this war. And President Zelensky over the weekend has been warning that Russia may be planning some type of particularly vicious attack to mark that day, to spoil the Independence Day, but also to remind Ukrainians as the war surpasses the 6-month mark that they remain vulnerable all across this country. And in preparation, Zelensky is warning Ukrainians to take extra precautions on that day. Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, will be having a round-the-clock curfew as they try to keep people safe on a very bittersweet Independence Day. Willie?
Yeah, Josh, clearly a tense week there in Ukraine. Talk to me a little bit more about the nuclear plant, the vulnerabilities to it. And, you know, without being alarmist, we don't want to get out ahead of ourselves, but I do think it's worth people trying to understand what would be the potential practical implications of a strike against that plant, which is the biggest nuclear power plant in the whole of Europe. What could be the ramifications?
Well, there's a few possibilities, Katty, and we've been speaking with nuclear experts about this. The nuclear reactors themselves, there's 6 of them there, are fairly secure. They're built to withstand a plane flying into them. We've already seen, though, a lot of shelling at the site that has damaged the power lines. Some of them have already been knocked out. And a big concern is that if the power supply to the cooling systems that keep the nuclear reactors from melting down goes out, they would really have to rely on diesel generators for short periods of time to try to keep to prevent a nuclear meltdown. And the other concern is there are massive amounts of spent nuclear fuel, hundreds of nuclear fuel rods that are stored at that site. They are less secure than the nuclear reactors themselves. So if there is shelling at that site that first damages the protective layer over them and then strikes the nuclear fuel itself, that could send radiation spreading. Depending on the size of the disaster here, some experts in Ukraine are predicting it could be larger than Chernobyl, could mirror what we saw in Fukushima, could send radiation spreading not only into Europe, but also into Russia, Katty.
Yeah, obviously, Josh, those are the concerns not there yet, thank goodness. As we mark this 6th month, I mean, we have to stop and say that Ukraine has more than held its own. Remember, the days leading up to this, the weeks leading up, there were thoughts that Russia and Putin were going to roll tanks into Kyiv and raise a flag and install a puppet government fairly quickly. But here we are now. And in fact, as you and I were talking about yesterday on Sunday Today, attacks from Ukraine inside Crimea even that land that was taken by Vladimir Putin in 2014, illegally, by the way. So in many ways, Ukraine is stepping up its attacks here as we hit the 6-month anniversary.
That's right, Willie. And it was interesting because for the first week or so that we were starting to see these mysterious explosions in Crimea, the Ukrainian government was really coy about it. They were not taking responsibility. They were kind of evading direct questions about whether Ukraine was behind those attacks. But in the last 2 days or so, we've started to see Ukrainian officials much more forthcoming about the fact that there is now a concerted campaign by Ukraine to try to liberate, to demilitarize Crimea. President Zelensky saying in one of his evening addresses that he can feel the liberation of Crimea in the air. Now, we should point out Russia has poured massive amounts of troops and military assets into Crimea. There's no sign they're going to be able to evict Russia from the territory they illegally occupied in 2014. But certainly Ukraine is trying to make clear to the Russians, including the Russians who are civilians living in Crimea, that they are vulnerable, that they are not safe, and that Russia can no longer feel that they are impervious and can use it as a rear base and a staging ground to attack Ukraine as the Ukrainians try to prevent this from becoming a frozen conflict and start to take back territory in the south as they head into the winter months.
And Ukraine obviously doing a lot of this with the billions of dollars of aid the United States and the West have provided. NBC News correspondent Josh Lederman covering a lot of ground for us from Ukraine this morning. Josh, thanks so much.